Hi. So, I would like to talk through Justin's minimum viable party. Now, Justin is new in the modular game and has very kindly commissioned yours truly to take a look at some modules that he has purchased and make a suggestion of how I would rearrange them, and particularly how would I patch them up in order to make a similar sort of techno system to what was in that 62 HP video. And in this video, I'm going to talk through how I would lay it out, and I'm actually going to show you step by step how I would patch it as well. And so this is what I have put together. Now, Justin owns a Ericasynths Pico system, and it's the Pico System 2, which contains the Ericasynths modules that you see here. So he has an Eastwick 6U case, which he has got the option of transferring these modules into. They're in their own little case at the moment. And then he's also been down to London Modular, and the very fine people at London Modular have put together or encouraged him to purchase a Mutable Stages, a Marbles, and a Plaits, all three of which are excellent choices. And I doff my cap at the purchasing of them. He also owns a Squarp Hermod, an excellent device too. So he's got a lot of stuff. He's got these three Stages, Marbles, Plaits, a Hermod, and the Ericasynths. And the brief is put them together in a system so that I can jam like your little 62 HP case. Well, obviously you've got a lot more space than 62 HP here, mate. And you can totally make dance music with it, of course. And the question is, what would you absolutely need in order to unify it in that kind of way and build a similar system to what I have? And my suggestions, I think the most important thing to state is that, you could make music with what you have if you had to. Do you know what I mean? I really want to hesitate on any suggestion that buying more things is always, is going to help, because I don't think that's often, a helpful way to think. It's the joy of these things is having a bit less than you'd like so that you work twice as hard. And especially if you have something like an Octatrack, then the Octatrack gives you that means to sample and rework audio. It can let you take what would be judged as a sort of inadequate system, a system that is not capable of producing a complete arrangement. And something like an Octatrack will allow you to create complete arrangements because it's letting you almost sample just elements and then shape them in a way that other modules would do. But if you've got an Octatrack, it will do it for you. So that's one thing. But speaking of Octatrack, Surgeon for a long time played using a modular synth and an Octatrack, and he was using the Octatrack in a kind of looping capacity so that he would be able to create little sequences, sample them into the Octatrack and blend to them during the performance, blending the recording with something new that he then set up on the modular. So he would get one thing going on the modular, record it into the Octatrack live, and then while he was playing that back out to the audience, use the modular to create the next thing, and then blend the two things together. And or for example, taking one element and layering it so that you are getting kind of chords out of a single oscillator and a sequencer, and it would start playing chords because you would have two layered parts made from the same elements on top of each other. These are all possibilities. And this is all very long-winded, but it's to put in context the fact that this may well be part of a performance system, and there are you can use parts of this to create things, or you could use it as a whole. So what I've done is I've designed this system to be like my performance rig, and I think probably the most important thing that you may need to purchase in order to make it all work is a quantizer and a pitch quantizer. Now, we were talking about this. Justin is new to the sort of modular world and is just getting into it. And what a pitch quantizer is it takes random voltages and it rounds them up and down so that they constrain to a musical scale. And this is an ornament and crime. And the ornament and crime is it's an open source project. It's a sort of third-party module made by this crew of people, and lots and lots of people build versions of them. So in a way, it's not made by any one person. It's made by lots of people. And there may be an official, maybe the original guys produce a version of it, but certainly many, many other people produce versions of it. And you can DIY it or you can buy it built. And there are wider versions and there are thinner versions. This is a thinner version. I'm not sure exactly which one, but an ornament and crime runs software basically, and it can do lots of things. There is probably the most interesting one, and the one that I will talk about, is a quad quantizer. So it has CV inputs, and it has outputs, and it has gate inputs. And what happens is that when you feed any CV into it, it will constrain that to a scale. And it means that you pick a scale, so like, C major, and I could take the outputs of an LFO, which are just going up and down randomly, and I could feed them into the ornament and crime, and that will become an arpeggio. Instead of going wow, it will go because it will be fixed to the scale. No matter what voltage you put in, it will be in scale. Which is super cool and exciting because it means that anything can become melodies. And why it's particularly important here is because in my live system, I'm doing this trick where I take a sample and hold module. And what I am doing is I'm using a sample and hold module to basically send one sequencer in and then hold at various times and send the different held voltages to different oscillators so that they hold at different times. And you can use an ornament and crime in a very similar way. You can send the stair-step voltages from a stages into the ornament and crime, and then you could also send an arpeggio from something like the DivKid Oct, or voltages from the Marbles, or voltages from Hermod, or even you could just put the output of the, I forget the name of this module, but this is basically an attenuator that can also make DC offsets, which are just direct current that is turned when you turn the knob. You could feed any of these in, and you can have it so that when you feed in a gate to these gate inputs, then it will sample and hold that voltage at for as long as you basically don't, when you put a gate in, it will hold. When you plug another gate in, it will hold again, and it will always be in scale. This is a small but hugely important point because it means that the various things that you create will all sing in tune. And it means that if you've got Plaits, a double oscillator, a voice here, then all of these three things will be in tune with each other, no matter what you use to create the voltages. So a quad quantizer, which is what the ornament and crime can run, and I think it's called Quantum-Main, is the mode in the ornament and crime. That is hugely valuable. So I would highly recommend getting something like that. Unfortunately, the Hermod, by the way, is very powerful, and the Hermod has its own scale quantizers built in, but unfortunately you can't use the Hermod's inputs, I don't think, as pitch quantizers. These are 4 voltage inputs. They are used to modify sequences and things that the Hermod creates, but they can't be used just to quantize a voltage that comes in, and that's unfortunately something that we would actually need. And there are some other things here. I'm not going to talk about them just yet. One of the main ones, though, is a filter. I think you need a quad quantizer, at least you could maybe get away with just a single quantizer, and we could get into why, because it would be more like my live system. But I think you're better with a quad, and you need a filter for your Plaits. And there are loads of choices. I've put in the System 80 860, which is a small version of a module called the Jove. It's a filter that I use with Plaits, and it just has a wonderful sound. And if you at all like Roland synths or sort of interested in Roland synths, it's just a gorgeous sound. And that with Plaits on chord mode is just joy. That's what I've used a lot, so I definitely recommend that. But there are lots of other good filters. There's like Doepfer. All of the Doepfer filters are worth having. A105, which is the SEM filter, is absolutely fantastic. That would be another choice. So yes, let me talk about sort of the whole. So it's kind of, I think you need a quad quantizer, and I'll explain, I've explained a bit about why, and then I think you need a filter for Plaits. And then the rest is, what do you use all this stuff for? Why is it all laid out like this? So I'll kind of go through it systematically, and what I will try and do is actually wire this as I go. So this will all be very long. It will be extremely long, and really it's for Justin's benefit. But Justin, hopefully, is going to let me share this with you all. So if you're all interested, then strap in, folks. Let's get nerdy. So on the top left is a trigger module, which, if I understand correctly, can be used as a master clock source. It should allow you to have, using a master clock, get 4 derivative clocks. And that can be very useful where you have lots of different sequences and various things like the Ornament and Crime, which might want gates and marbles and stages, all of which run and have clocks, need a clock source to do their thing. It's therefore helpful to have a master clock source that can drive them all, and can drive them all in a way that is they are musically related to each other, which is what it should let you do. And so what I'm going to do, and by the way, I'm now on rainbow mode, which, God bless Nut from Modular Grid. He added it because I asked for it. You're a very sweet man. So as a master clock source, now the only problem is this Hermod does not have a gate or clock input, but so we're going to have to use it as the master. We'll get to this. So what we want to try and do is, first, I want to use the Hermod's 8-gate output, and we're going to program just a simple 8-step pattern onto it. So the Hermod can be used as in place of the grayscale algorithm, which I use in my system, because with the Hermod you can do so many wonderful things. But for this purpose, what I'm going to suggest its primary use will be simply creating interesting drum patterns. And you can do them by just programming each step, but there are also Euclidean drum pattern generators in there, and I highly recommend that you RTFM and get involved with Euclidean drum patterns with Hermod, because you'll have a very good time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go output of 8 into the clock input of the trig, and so that we are going to then program a constant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pattern here, so that every time this advances, every time this makes a gate, this will clock. And then in turn, we distribute this around the case. So there's a clock input here for marbles. You need that to go in. And there is a clock input to stages. So stages is amazing. Stages is a module that can be pretty much anything your heart could desire. Stages can be a sequencer. It can be an amazing envelope generator. It can be LFOs. And it can be, what am I missing? It can be a sample and hold generator as well. So you can use it to do the thing that I'm doing in my 62 HP system, where I'm actually sampling and holding a voltage and then sending it to different places. You can actually sample and hold accurately without droop on a stages. It's really amazing. And you can use it as LFOs. You can create LFOs with it. Did I say that? And many combinations at the same time. And I'm not going to go massively into it, otherwise this video really will be like 4.5 hours long. But suffice to say that what I would suggest, my gut feeling would be use stages as a 5-step sequencer. And to make that work, you have to you patch from right to left. So I go into the 5th socket from the right, that's this one, and these little lights all need to be on the orange. So I'm going to sort of put this marker in line with orange to remind you that you have to push all these buttons so that they're in orange. I'm not clever enough to remember if they need to be orange flashing or not. Probably not. And what will happen is that when you supply a clock to here, you will get a 5-step sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can just adjust the faders and you get a really satisfying, simple way of creating melodies. And that's just what you want. You just want it to be simple and easy and joyful. And then the output will be this bottom one here. So that can go to our ornament and crime CV input. So we're going to send random, or not random voltage, but freely tuned voltages that are not to scale. And we're going to send them through the pitch quantizer, and we're going to quantize them. And what you could do so that they quantize on the beat, as it were, is you could take a copy of the clock that you are driving this with. So every time you advance this, this will trigger. And so every time you move this onto a new note, you also tell this to sample and hold the note. However, what you may want to do is mix things up and gate that differently, but let's try this for now. And then the output voltage will then go to, let's say, your bass voice. So I'm going to go to the 1 volt per octave. So these modules I see being like a bass voice. This I see being a chord voice. That is the voice module from Pico. That's a 3rd extra voice. So you have 3 voices, and then you have drums, by the way. And so, cool. What next? Well, okay, so that's your bass voice. Now, it depends how the point is, I'm sort of thinking here because there's different ways of triggering. You've fundamentally got a bunch of different ways of triggering either the stabs of bass things or the actual sound of drums, the drums themselves. And the outputs that you have that can do that are the marbles. So the marbles is amazing. On the left side, it has 3 gate outputs. And then on the right side, it actually has 4 control voltage outputs. And these can be looped with the déjà vu control. And the bias control can be used to adjust the drums. And then with these little switches, there are 3 different drum modes, all that have different characteristics. So you would find if you just route these literally to the triggers on your drums here, on your drum modules, and then mix the drum module out and just have a jam with this, that output, and that output, you will discover that the marbles is just able to make amazing drums, kick, snare, and hats. Really, kind of a what, depending on the mode that you have selected here. Also, if you dig around, there are hidden modes. There are Easter egg hidden modes for marbles, which you generally with all Mutable Instruments modules, there are Easter eggs. So if you Google them, you'll find on forums how to access them, and they give you extra functions. But my point was that you can either decide that you're going to use the Hermod and use the gate outputs and use those to program your drums, and you can just do the simple thing of just pushing the button to correspond which beat you want the drums to be on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or you can use marbles to do this. So you could say, I want algorithmic drums that are being triggered, or I want an algorithmic triggering of flats, for example. And I think that is kind of what I thought might be interesting to do that. But what I personally would do, I've used a Ladic S180 module, which is just a simple trigger sequencer to trigger my Plaits voice. So I think for the sake of consistency and the fact I know that sounds good and works, let's do that. So I'm going to say gate output 1 of the Hermod triggers Plaits, and also I think I told you when we spoke, I would have Plaits on a constant drone mode. But trig, it may be important to have plumbed in, because on certain modes of Plaits, the trig will sort of excite the voice and create things happening. So it's probably important to still have it plugged in. So this will trigger that. Then I want an envelope. Oh yes, this thing here. So this is the Pico mod, and you're going to feed this into gate. So this will also trigger Pico mod. The envelope output of the Pico mod will go into frequency CV1. You will need to turn this up for it to work. And then you will need to feed it something. The left out can go into in1, and the aux out can go into in2. Oh, actually do it the other way around, because there is a volume knob here for 1, and I would say that you always want the out to be the one that you hear, and the aux can be one that you blend in by turning up this. And then you need to plug the output of it into the VCA. I think that's the end. And then the output of the VCA, that is the completed voice, I would probably put into input 3. Because I would go drums, bass, Plaits, top voice. So that's Plaits all sorted. However, you need some voltage for pitch, and that could come in here. So I'm going from output 2 on the Ornament and Crime, and then I'm going to 1 volt per octave, V-oct. That is the pitch input. 1 volt per octave corresponds to the fact that for every volt of voltage, it literally ups this oscillator by 1 octave. There is this little button here. You can hold that button and turn the harmonics dial, and it will let you shift the Plaits up and down in the octaves, which is helpful for kind of getting it in the right register. Okay. And then what you could do is this, and set the trigger so that I'm sending the trigger into the same trigger that will trigger the note will also cause the Ornament and Crime to hold the voltage at constant pitch until it is triggered again. Now, my screen recording software fell over during this period, so I'm actually going to re-record this tiny little section here, and actually I can properly explain something that I wasn't sure of when I recorded this, which is that if you plug a CV output into this input CV1, in the software you can set the other channels 2, 3 and 4 so that they copy the CV from channel 1, and then you will be able to use the gate inputs above and the outputs below to get different versions of it. For want of a better term, you will basically be copying CV1 to 2, 3 and 4 without the need to plug other cables in to physically copy that signal, mult it to the other channels. But what I'm about to do in a second is I will wire up a little mult just to show you as an illustration. But you actually don't need to do that. You can do it in software, and you do it by changing the CV source. There's a CV source control. Just set them all to CV1. Okay, back to it. But let's just put a little cable here to remind ourselves to mult, create a copy. If you're using stack cables, you can just stack them across. But I think it probably does. I can't remember. But what I'm getting at is I want this same voltage that stages this 5-step voltage. I want it to go into all of the channels. And I'm going to gate them differently with different things. This first one, I'm actually just using a clock division here. And, you know, I might want to change that, in fact. In fact, I definitely do. I want to have like a Euclidean thing going on. In which case, I'd be tempted to say, take the trigger out of there. And then use like marbles. Like use the marbles output 1 here and use that. Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, this is just how I do things as well. You think about things when you do these. So basically what we're then going to use is this first gate output of marbles. That will be triggering this bass voice. And I'll take a copy of that. I'll bring that over to EG gate, because that's also going to be, so this one gate, this single channel marbles, will be both triggering the voltage that is being held here, and it will also be triggering the voice at the same time. So now let's wire up the voice. I'm going to take the output of VCO1. I'm going to feed it into the in of the mixer. I'm going to take the output of VCO2. I'm going to feed it into input 2 of the mixer. I'm going to take the 1 pulse per octave output, which is the straightened out quantized version, and I'm going to feed it from one to the other so that they both get the same pitch information. But what I'm certainly going to do is use the little knobs. I'm going to tune them differently. I don't know necessarily, a word on tuning is basically have it so that all your voices have all the filters open and wide, and you can hear them all droning at the same time. Save this in case I lose it. And then just tune them with voltage running through this. Just tune them so that they sound good. That's a terrible bit of advice. But just tune them so that they all kind of work in relationship to each other. That, I think, is the main thing. And if they sound harmonious and the bass is nicely low and interesting, the chord sits above it, and the voice above it, or in the middle, start then playing around with the sequencer and getting things going, and you can adjust the frequency dials to taste. But that's not a very good explanation. But basically, have a constant voltage here going through here so that they're all just at a steady pitch, and then tune them in relationship in the kinds of registers where they will exist. So the bass voice will be quite low, but not too low. And then the chord will be somewhere in the middle, and the voice could be somewhere in the middle as well. What I would say, and because I highly, highly recommend this mode on Plaits, this green button, second one from the bottom, that is chord mode. I have mine on chord mode pretty much permanently. That's the mode I would use Plaits on. You'll find it the most satisfying immediately. Then adjust timbre. I usually have the timbre a bit lower. The more you have the timbre up, the higher pitched it will sound. And then just play with harmonics and morph, and you'll start to get a feel for it. You can have a lot of fun with Plaits, by the way, if you modulate the model, which will change the mode. So you can sort of, depending on what you do. Feeding, for example, this random voltage into model will give you lots of interesting things, but it might make it go a bit wacky. You may not want too much whack. So anyway, we were patching this. So the point is I would tune, by the way, what I was going to say on Plaits was I would put it on this initial mode, the top one in green, to tune it, because that's just a bass, then get it in tune, and with it in tune, don't touch the frequency dial anymore, and then move it onto chord mode, and you know that it's tuned in the root, the root note is tuned. Okay. So we've got the pitch linked, and they've been tuned differently, the two oscillators, so they're going to do some cool stuff. Make sure they're in VCO mode, not in LFO mode. And then their outputs are going to the mixer. So the output of the mixer, that needs to go into the in of the filter. And then the out of the filter can go into the in of the VCA. A VCA is just a module that is an amplifier, a voltage-controlled amplifier. And an amplifier, can turn things up, but it can also turn things down. So we're going to use the output of the envelope generator, and I'm going to feed it into the input control of the amplifier. And this amplifier will always be turned all the way down unless we're feeding a voltage. So if you don't plug in the EG, you won't hear anything. But when you plug the EG in, and when you trigger it, you will hear it making a sound. I'm going to plug its output into input 2. So I've created this little chain here, and eventually it'll feed into input 2. So bass in here, chord voice in here. Okay, save our work. And then our third thing is this other voice. And so again, I'm going to take another voltage off of the Ornament and Crime. So you can see why it's so important. This thing is going to be tuning, keeping all of our elements in the same scale. I'll go into the 1 volt per octave input of the voice. I will then take the trigger and I will think, hey, what am I going to trigger the voice with? I could use marbles, that's an option, or I could use Hermod, and I think probably in this instance, try something prescriptive, i.e. that you go on to channel 2 on the Hermod and you dab these buttons to trigger this voice. It's nice sometimes to have certain things that use, like marbles, will be controlling your bass voice, so it will be a really kind of abstract way of controlling it by just turning the bias control and the rate control and by adjusting the mode it's on and so forth. And deja vu, you'll get repeating gate patterns that you won't be telling it every note what to play. It'll just be coming up with that by itself. It's really cool. And if you then feed random voltages into it, it will be changing those parameters for you. But here it's nice to mix up that kind of random, hey, I don't know, coin toss sort of vibe with something on the Hermod where you have determined precisely what you're going to hear per step. But obviously with the Hermod's effects, you can then jumble up what this does. So there's loads of fun to be had. And then the output of that goes into input 4. So this is a complete voice, really cool module. It'll be making loads of different sounds. It'll be very useful to have because it's always just do something slightly different, and you'll need to tune it. So again, have your whole system droning and tuning it accordingly. We don't know where that will need to be, but it will need to be tuned. Yes. So we've got a sequence. Our sequence is going to the Ornament and Crime. We've got a marbles creating some cool gates, and the sequencer and the marbles are being synchronously, new word, are being clocked in a musically related way. I don't know how you're going to clock them exactly, what rates you're going to do them at, but you're going to feel that out. And there is a rate control for marbles to adjust as well, but you'll find the sweet spot eventually. And then, so that's triggering, this one here is triggering your bass voice. And yes, and then, yeah, this is the pitch. Okay, so then drums. So you've got these 3 voices, Plaits, mad bass voice here. That'll sound really gnarly. The VCF one, by the way, the mix knobs must be up for you to hear the thing. The VCF is yours to squiggle. And I thought of something. is things you can do with the bass voice that will be cool. So you've got these CV inputs, I suspect, will do wacky things. One of the most sort of interesting, satisfying things you could do are feeding... Oh, by the way, I missed a connection. I should also have connected the envelope. So the EG output is controlling the VCA. It should also go to the filter, so that the filter is being swept just as the amplifier is being swept. And by adjusting the attack and release, and you'll probably want the attack to be low and the release to be longer, you will hear a nice kind of pew sound while it plays. And what I was going to say is you might want to set up some like cross modulation between the oscillators. That can be nice, and something that I've set up before, where you could take a copy of the output of one of the oscillators and you would feed it through an attenuator, which is a thing that makes things loud and quiet. And here I've spec'd this Mutable Instruments one, where it has an input, and then, oh, damn it, I just got rid of that cable. There's no undo, isn't there? Where was that? That was going to the 1 volt per octave. And yes, sorry, so there's an input here, and then there's an output. I'm going to feed, so where did we start? We took the audio output of oscillator 1, and I'm going to feed it into the WCV, which I think is just a CV control for the pitch. of the second oscillator. And what will happen is if I have this knob all the way down closed, and I have this on unidirectional mode rather than bidirectional, maybe, I don't know if maybe want it on attenuating. Yeah, maybe. You might want it in the top, in which case that will need to be in the center. What will happen is by turning this dial right or left, you will be sending the pitch output to control the other oscillator, and you'll get FM synthesis, you'll get frequency modulation, and in short it will make it go really zingy and strange, which is highly techno, something that's fun to do occasionally. And if you just leave it in the middle, or if you have it on this bottom mode, you just have it all the way turned anti-clockwise, then you won't hear any effect. But it's an effect that you can use in a set to be like, oh, I'm going to turn that up and I will get like zingy insanity, you know, between my two oscillators. If you tune them well to each other, they'll sound in tune and harmonious, but when you turn up that dial, you'll get this weird zingy thing occurring, you know, and it's just something that you can almost have a bit of paper that's like, don't forget about zingy dial, and if you turn up zingy dial, then you'll get zinginess, which I think we all want in life, a little bit of zinginess. So, what next? We've got our pitch voice. We've kind of done some stuff. It sounds really cool. We need to get some drums going on. So I would highly recommend that you head on down to your favorite modular shop and purchase. Oh, by the way, I should say that this output SEQ and this Black MIDI CV module I don't have a use for. But so maybe you want to bankroll those bad boys, or keep them handy, put them in a drawer just in case you would definitely be able to make use of the sequencer of all of these, because the sequencer you could use to control things like model. That would actually be really cool. Like if you used this like prescriptive sequencer where you choose what's happening per step and you clocked it from the trig, you could sequence model with a sequencer and get real precise control over what model it was per step. That would actually be really good. So what I might do is let's just include it. And you've got space here, but I've spread things out. But for the sake of sort of illustration, so clock in and then CV out into model. That would be rad. And if you wanted, you could run it through one of these so that you'd have a knob to control the range, the overall range that this was creating, so that it would move the model a little bit or a lot depending on how the knob was turned. That's why it's useful to have attenuators, just because they just let you rein in things so that they're usable and that you can turn things off and then have modulation that is ready to go, that you don't have to set up mid-patch. Do you know what I mean? It's just ready to go, and so off you go. So this Doepfer A182-2 is a switch module, and we've gotten very cabley here, but I hope you might be able to zoom in a bit. So the way that this module works is there are like 4 clusters of 3 sockets. There's like one here, one here, one here, one here, and these correspond to these 4 switches down below. Anything that you plug into the center, so look at this top 3 here on the top left. If you plug something into the center, and then you have, say that's an output of something, then you connect the top one and the bottom one to 2 different destinations. So you've got a source. It could be like a sequence, or it could be, let's say, a gate pattern, making a cool funky gate pattern, which we would want to send directly into a drum module. But instead of connecting it directly, we're going to connect the outputs here to 2 different drum modules. And we're going to use this switch down here. And by flipping the switch up, it will send that out of here. And if I flip this down, it will send that out of the bottom one. So you can use this to choose whether something is going from here to here, or from here to here. And if you have it in the middle, it will be off. Pretty sweet. So, in short, what I'm going to do is I want that to be part of my life. My life's richer with that in it. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it in reverse. So I'm going to use this as a way of choosing whether I use Hermod or Marbles is available channels to go into the Pico drum modules, so that I've got, because I want drum backline as part of this whole thing, you know, it's got to have drums. So what I will do is I will plug one output of 3, and I'll plug this into the top one, and I'll take Marbles output 2, I will plug it into the bottom one, and I'll take the middle one and I will plug it into the trigger 1. I think that is trigger 1, not knowing this module that well, but it is each of these drum modules makes 2 drums depending on how they're triggered. And so then what I'm going to do is this same idea. I'm going to put the center sockets into the trigger inputs. And I may want to change this around, but I hope that makes sense. I'm putting the center sockets into the trigger inputs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed all my various gate sources into those sockets. And by flicking these little switches up and down, I will be choosing where in my system my drums are being triggered from. So it allows me to, you know, you could use them as mutes. So you could flip them all into the center, all your drums would stop. Or if you flicked one down and up, it would let you create variations. And it's important to not think of gates as just something for drums, because, for example, you could use this module and you could be routing your Plaits triggers, which I think we agreed was the Hermod. Those could be going through them or whatnot. You know, it could be useful for anything. But in this instance, let's just use it like this. So this is going to get messy. This is where things get into the sort of extreme spaghetti territory. Highly Italian. And then, you know, you could also, there's nothing to stop you sharing outputs. You know, you could say, for example, I could use this third output on this channel, what is actually channel 2. By the way, the module is upside down, which I highly recommend putting it in upside down, because then all the cables are at the top, and then these are, you know, your fingers are free to access these. And you could have, for example, the bottom of this one being triggered by the same output. So that one output is fed to the bottom of this channel 1 and the top of channel 2. And I could, by flipping, you know, I could choose which of them. I might want it basically by putting this one down and this one up, then both drum sounds would be triggered at the exact same time. You would get a layered drum sound. And then by flipping any one of them, then you would be breaking that layering. Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of, and I'm kind of, it's just one of those things. You kind of, when I say one of those things, it's one of those things that you probably want to, you know, you will work out by feel and what you're interested in more. You know, you have to play and try it and just be like, that works. I like triggering it with that, or I like triggering it with that, or I don't like triggering it with that. And so what I've then done is I've wired, you know, various outputs from the Hermod into these, and I've wired the available outputs from Marbles, the gate outputs that is from Marbles, into this. Bob's your uncle. Wonderful, isn't it? So now I'm going to feed the output of these drum modules into this one, going to in one. By the way, this is a mixer, so it's a combined output of both of the drums, I believe. And a combined output of the second set of drums goes into the output of that goes in to the input 1 of my mixer. By the way, I haven't talked about the mixer, but I hope it's obvious. You need a mixer. You actually do need one, I think. Unless I think you've got that little Mackie, but I don't think it's got enough channels. You can try it by all means, and it might well work fine. I've had really good success using Mackie to mix modular stuff. But what I would say is that modular stuff, you know, officially is loud. very loud, louder than line level, and so it can't be guaranteed that your Mackie would handle it. I have used a Mackie mixer to handle my drums, and it's my modular, actually, I should say, and it's done really well. So it is an option. But this Doepfer A138P and the corresponding A1380, I think it is, the output, which you need, by the way, otherwise you don't get any output. This is a really good, like, it just ticks so many boxes in a very small amount of space. It's got mutes on and off. You've got level controls, which is obviously important to trim things, but most importantly, you have auxes, an aux send and an aux return, which I would like to use to control your DSP, your DUSP. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go the aux send into the in of your DUSP, the out, probably L, because it is stereo, but this is not, I'm afraid, into the aux return. And so what we've done is just create a little feedback loop so that when you turn up any one of these, they will flow through your DSP. What you must do is put your DSP so that the wet is fully wet. You've got to be wet to enjoy your DSP. So that's just, yeah. And but you probably need to trim the aux send. If you have it set up as it is, it'll probably be mostly okay. And so that just means that you can, as a performance thing, send stuff through effects. That's a huge part of it. And even just having one effect is not ideal, but you've only got one aux send in return, but there'd be nothing wrong with having, delay and reverb, mixed together. And you could have them in series, or if you had another mixer, then you could mix them in parallel as well. So you could send from the aux send, and then you could mult it. So you were sending that equally to your delay and to your reverb, mix them, and then you would return them in parallel into the return. Or, as I said in the other video, there are ways that you can sort of create aux functionality. There are simpler mixers in Eurorack that, just dumb little mixers like this mix. And with enough of these, you could equate the functionality of this. But it's nice to have mutes. And some of the it's just nice to have things spread out and to have a place to put your right hand, basically, because I have in my live system, I have a very posh mixer from VCO, the Hex Mix. And I would honestly say, hands down, it is the one thing that I would not change in my live system. If I could just have one thing consistent, it would be that mixer, because a good mixer it is hugely important. It's just it's the very linchpin and backbone. But I mean, there are lots of good mixers. It doesn't have to be that one. But what I'm getting at is, having a real performance mixer is important to fade things in and to bring things out and so on and so forth. So yeah, then, by the way, on a higher level, you will need the MIDI, your MIDI in, that will need to be clocked by your Octatrack. So your Octatrack will need to be the master, or the leader, I should say. It should be the leader and this the follower. And the way that this works, again, it will be pattern 8 here will be a constant gate and will act as the clock source. It will act as a sort of MIDI to CV converter, MIDI to clock converter for you. And what you might find is it'll be interesting to sort of vary, while everything's merrily blipping along, your Hermod, your marbles, what you might want to do is actually mess with this trig and turn this one, the stages, down. And by having the stages going at very slow divisions, you'll get really long performance passages out. And then what you'll do is adjust these faders, and it will change, you'll hear it will change the melody, so that one sequencer will be changing the melody of all 3 parts in an musically harmonious way that's actually a lot better than what you saw in that video. So that's pretty much it. The only thing that we haven't talked about is this little module here, and there's a spare stages, and that's worth mentioning are LFOs. Attenuators and LFOs in combination are wonderful because they will allow you to gently modulate things. So if you take this, so what will happen is, by the way, because you've plugged this into this part of stages, there is one part of stages here free that can be used for something else. And if you put it in green mode and you hold the button down and it will start flashing, I'm pretty sure that's right, then it will become a LFO. So you'll have an LFO with a rate and then with a shape control up here that you can vary. By the way, these need to be at the bottom if you want hard changes in your sequence from step to step. But if you turn them up, you'll get slides, which are nice. Actually, you won't, because you'll be quantizing the output. You'll hear a sort of stair-step slide. You'll see what I mean when you play around. But this output could be an LFO, and I would make it an LFO, and I would use it to do things like control things on Plaits, or, you know, for example, you could have a bit of the LFO, you know, doing a wah, 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 wah sort of rate, and then put it into the FM control of Plaits, the tiniest amount, but it will give you vibrato, which is nice. Or actually, I'll tell you what, one thing that I have done, and I've just got so many cables in the way, it's Freak CVT. Yeah, okay, so this would be my advice, actually, would be use that LFO to control. So we go out from, this is the output for it, and we'll assume that we've set it up. I'm going to put that to remind you it's green and a double tap, well, like a hold to make it flash. You'll work out just RTFM, how to create an LFO. Feed that into this input, which is another CV input. Yes, it will be that one, I think. Yes, it will. Just thinking about, that is the control for CV1. No. Okay. So basically this input here for frequency is controlled by that knob, which is bidirectional, and that's nice. So you can fine tune how the envelope adjusts the filter, and you'll want, by the way, to have it on this mode, 24 dB, nice sharp. But this other one, which I think you should move it through an attenuator again, so that you can rein in, because that's an attenuator, but there's a second input to control a filter as well, but it does not have an attenuator. So by putting one in the path, you are adding an attenuator to it. And by doing so, by then having this LFO on a very slow rate and just have it being sent a little bit in, what will happen is you will very slowly be sweeping the frequency dial. And what I have done is achieved in a slightly different way with a different module, but I have a very slow, like 2-bar, 4-bar LFO sweep, which I have as an option going into my version of the 860. And it slowly, it's nice to have. It just means that the filter is always getting slowly swept for you if you turn up. You know, on my one, I actually have an attenuator that controls it, but it's a slightly different module. But by using an attenuator or an attenuverter, you can create that functionality yourself. It's good. And it's an example of how modular, you know, if you were complaining, or if you're like, it's a bit annoying that there's a direct CV input, but it does not have a corresponding attenuator. Well, that's modular, is just buy an attenuator, put it in the path, and you create the functionality that you wish. So usually where there's a will, there's a way, or if you're like, that's just doing too much. And then the other thing, finally, is to say that you've got all of this control voltage, and you've also got all of the control voltage that the Hermod is creating here. So these are all just gates. We're only using the Hermod as a gate sequencer, yet all of these are capable of making incredible voltages using effects, and as are these repeatable, interesting voltages. You could use some of those voltages and run them through the pitch of the OC. You could use part of them, could be using stages, and maybe outputs 3 and 4, they could be using these voltages. And you could be using Deja Vu to lock and repeat these voltages, so that it wasn't all being generated by this, so that only half of it was, you know. Does that make sense? Or so yeah, this one, third one here. So that, you know, the voice here, voice module, could be controlled by that output, for example. And, you know, as long as you've made enough notes and you've patched all this together yourself, it will make sense. And it's just, I don't know how else to describe it. It's just nice to have things that just are, you know, randomly generated but repeatable, which you can lock. That's one of the most important things with marbles. There's another great module called the Turing machine from Music Thing, and marbles is basically an ultra hyper super version of the Turing machine. There is also something marbles can do with this input here, where you could actually feed the output of your pitch sequencer in to that, and then use it to sample into marbles and then jumble up the voltages that you fed it. There is a thing you can actually do that. I'm not clever enough to remember how you do that, but just for your information, maybe it's that. No, it's this one. It is possible to do. Marbles is very powerful, so it's worth reading the manuals, and the manuals are really well written. Like Emily's manuals for the all the mutable stuff. You know, as a non-native English speaking person, are just so well written and easy to understand. So yeah, definitely get into them. You know, as is the Hermod manual. It's very well written. And so in short, I would be getting all this going and jamming. I think, and that's, by the way, that's your main output there. Feed that into your Octatrack, and then, you know, or maybe your Mackie, but no, especially your Octatrack. And you could also use the aux sends to go into your Octatrack. So it could be aux send into the Octatrack. Holy crap. And then be using all the Octatrack's power as like a sampler and a reverb and a delay and all that jazz. But if you patch this up, that will basically be, I think, unless I miss something incredibly significant, that is a performance patch from this system. And I will give you the link to Justin's Minimum Viable Party. I will link to it here. So it's kind of a theoretical party. And I hope that you will, you know, you will consider partying in that way. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention this, Oct. And, you know, maybe it's not necessary, but I put it in as a thinking point. And to, as I hinted at before, what you then kind of need to do is choose how to modulate things. And that could, you know, like, mainly it's like modulate your voices. So it's, you know, that's probably wave CV, isn't it? Not pitch CV. So I was probably wrong here, but that will actually be really cool anyway. For example, you know, if this is the CV control for the tone that is being created, then that's good fodder for random voltages, so that every, you know, randomly someone's turning the wave dial. It could be rubbish because, you know, as I've found generally with techno, is it's, you know, something that really is random every step is not musically satisfying. You know, it's much better when it's just the same thing until you change it, because techno is, the essence of techno is randomness that has been repeated enough. You know, it's like, you know, one random moment repeated 100 times is techno. So, you know, so that's kind of, there's some thoughts to be had, but basically it then becomes, you know, where do I have CV ins, you know, CV ins for the drums here, controls a CV in here for the DSP, for, you know, CV in here for the voice to change things, you know, resonance CV in here to control the amount of resonance, you know, wherever I saw it, or for example, self-patching things. So for example, these outputs could be fed back into the module. So I could be using, you know, the random voltage outputs to control the bias, which will, so the self-patching of marbles is 100,000% a thing. So it then becomes, how do I make the use of other voltages? What can I feed them to? And, you know, you build it up slowly, step by step. This looks scary if you look at it now, but we have just done it all step by step. And if you build it up and understand why each connection is made, then you are the master of the patch, and you then can think about, hey, how can I get this even more jazzified? But it really becomes about musical taste and just being like finding the most satisfying combination of elements. And then it especially my advice, as I've said in other videos and stuff, which I'll link to, it becomes practice. This is an instrument. Patched in this way, I think you should be able to, it's an instrument that you have to learn. And so don't unpatch it and just leave it like that and keep practicing until you understand, why and how it's, why is it doing that? Why does that happen? And then, the advice from Stevie O, how to practice, is to replicate gig conditions, which is to say that you give yourself a set amount of time, like an hour to play, and you do not stop. And if it sounds rubbish and something's broken, you just carry on, and you carry on and carry on and carry on. And by continuing to experiment in ways that are musically satisfying for enough time, you learn all of the various things that your system is capable of doing, and eventually you will arrive at a point where you're comfortable playing. Basically what happens is that you'll look at the clock and you realize you've just been jamming solid for 2.5 hours, or 3 hours or something. You're like, what? Well, I thought I was just testing this new patch or, this new module. That's usually a good sign. If you've just been, without any breaks, just flowing and enjoying yourself, then you're well on your way. So that's it. That's the party. It's not a minimum viable party, but my God, it will be a party. Thank you for watching. Thank you. And if you're watching this and you are hoping for a sort of modular clinic of your own, get in touch. We can talk about it. And thank you, Justin. Yeah, I hope you have fun. That's it. Have fun. Take care.